What the hell, Dallas? I was promised George Pickens' offseason contract drama. Now I'm just left with Diana Rossini headlines and Terrion Arnold thinking his life is a movie of Ocean's 11. What is going on, everybody? Welcome into the teens of my preseason power rankings deep dive series countdown in the lead up to the start of the 2026 NFL season. As today we will take a deep dive into the 2026 Dallas Cowboys. We're going to get right into it here, but if you've enjoyed this deep dive series, if you enjoy this Cowboys deep dive, and you want to show a little bit of support for this channel, please do take a second to hit that like button down below. It's a free and easy thing that really does go a long way towards supporting this series, pushing it out to other Cowboys fans and NFL sickos just like yourself, and a little football animation will even show up when you do. Also, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these deep dives in the lead up to the number one team in my power rankings. But let's go ahead and get started breaking down the Dallas Cowboys here. As we do in this series, we go through every aspect of the team, through each position group and the coaching staff. And at the beginning of each segment, we take a look at the team's offseason changes and ask the question, did they get better, worse, or stay the same? So we'll begin with the Cowboys coaching staff, who did make one notable change this offseason, and one that I know is going to put a smile on the Cowboys fans' faces, as not only do they say goodbye to Matt Eberflus, who has really had a falling out in this NFL through his failed Bears regime, and now with a horrible year as the Cowboys defensive coordinator, still has a job, by the way, as the assistant head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, taking an identical path that Brandon Staley took. Maybe it'll yield a similar result for Eberflus, who's now at a similar point in his career as Staley was. But anyway, Cowboys fans are like, that's enough about Matt Eberflus for the rest of my life. The Cowboys didn't just move on from Eberflus to make Cowboys fans happy, but they also stole a defensive coach from the hated Philadelphia Eagles, as they handpick Christian Parker to be their new defensive coordinator, his first run at doing so. So obviously it's going to be determined to find out just how good at being a defensive coordinator Christian Parker will be. That's going to ultimately decide how much of an upgrade this is, but with how bad Eberflus was and Parker being a reasonable hire, I did see enough to say slightly upgraded with this change for the offseason, and hopefully, tremendously upgraded would be ideal. But with that, let's break down this coaching staff in depth, discuss where these guys are at heading into the second year of the Brian Schottenheimer regime. And honestly, with Schottenheimer, I don't really have a long, elaborate take like I can have sometimes in this segment of the deep dives. I definitely think that after he was, and I think it's fair to say he was a questionable hire by Jerry Jones, who has a history of, at this point, not getting the head coach position right and picking a yes man that is going to let him carry out his billionaire wishes as a NFL owner. There was some of those red flags. You got the fact that it's kind of a nepotism hire, right? He was being Marty Schottenheimer's son, having spent so much time around the NFL, but really, especially at the point of when he was hired as the Cowboys head coach, Schottenheimer really was never in consideration for being a head coach. But he has been around the NFL for a really long time. He's been an offensive coordinator or higher really since 2006. And, I did say in last year's deep dive, it's a curious hire, but there's stuff to like with Schottenheimer, and let's give him a chance. And I think there was always an underlying 5% worst case scenario where this was just a train wreck type of hire, like a Frank Reich in Carolina or a Urban Meyer type of hire that just kind of derails the team and loses the locker room, and you can tell that guy just was a bad hire from the get-go. And very clearly from the outstart, that was not the case. Brian Schottenheimer looked and felt the part from the beginning, and even grew on me before the season started. He knows how to handle a press conference, the locker room. The players definitely, I think, rally behind this guy if you want to talk about the leadership aspect of being a head coach. And it was really always going to be an interesting kind of rocky road of a transition season with a new coach, and having traded Micah Parsons a week before the season started, they go and get Quentin Williams kind of buy back into this team mid-season. But at no point did Brian Schottenheimer lose the locker room, like you can see with some disastrous hires. And then also just like there's the other side of Schottenheimer, that he is an offensive-minded head coach and offensive coordinator. And from that regard as well, definitely passed the eye test, like really from week one, where they're huge underdogs against the defending Super Bowl champion Eagles. And they come in and, you know, the debut of George Pickens and Schottenheimer's first game without Mike McCarthy there really was an announcement like, hey, this offense is going to be a pain in the ass to deal with. And they were largely steady in being an excellent offense last season. So I think as we head into year two for Brian Schottenheimer, I think you can easily say that there aren't really like, you know, any red flags or some really low ceiling with Schottenheimer. He looks the part. He can handle both in regards to running the locker room and being the offensive coach of this team. Now it's just a matter of, can they take that next step? Can they be more of a playoff contender and push forward and maybe surprise some people as a team this year a little bit? There's room for that, for sure, with Brian Schottenheimer. And heading into year two, he's got very solid rankings for me, the 21st ranked head coach in the NFL right now. As far as the like offensive coach rankings, in that kind of like solid middle good cluster of offensive play designers, ranking right in that like 15 to 23 range, both for pass game and run game coaching. So a really good baseline with Brian Schottenheimer. And then you also got to give Clayton Adams a quick shout out as well. I called this out in last year's deep dive. I think Dallas, for all the hate they get as, you know, Jerry Jones and being this, you know, a lot of times people say they're a poorly run organization. I've fought back against that at times. They were kind of trendsetters here in the sense of like, okay, what's the next most important coach on your team after your coordinators? And, you know, if your head coach is your coordinator, obviously, like that would double up. It's the offensive line coach. And if you are going to have an offensive play caller as your head coach, why not poach an offensive line coach to get the title of offensive coordinator from a different team? And that's exactly what they did. And Clayton Adams is an ascending mind. You consistently hear his name brought up as a respected offensive coordinator at this point after being a respected offensive line coach, getting a lot out of not a lot with the Cardinals offensive line for a few years there. And if things continue to trend in the right direction and go well here in Dallas, and if, you know, some of these offensive linemen continue to develop under him, he is a name that is certainly going to be brought up into the mix for head coach interviews as early as this upcoming offseason. So it's a big deal that he's here helping out Schottenheimer as well, especially in regards to the run game and offensive line development. Now, I definitely want to break down the Cowboys scheme here, but before we do that, one thing I learned as a new father is that all the people around me were telling me, before you have your kid, you got to do a bunch of meal prep because you're not going to have time to cook, and you definitely don't want to spend a fortune on delivery and end up with nothing to eat. And this would have been excellent advice for me, except for one little problem, that I can't cook to save my life. And this is exactly why the sponsor for today's video, Cook Unity, came into my life at the perfect time. Cook Unity is a chef-to-you meal delivery program that connects you with hundreds of fresh, fully prepped meals from award-winning chefs. With Cook Unity, you can choose from over 400 meals nationwide each week, including over 45 global cuisines and diets. All meals are handcrafted in small batches in local kitchens by you. There are over 130 chefs on the program, including some of my own favorite Food Network stars, James Beard Award winners, and Michelin-starred masters. Meals are delivered fully cooked, so all you have to do is heat them up in 2 minutes or less, and you're ready to eat. Not only has Cook Unity been a game changer for me and my wife looking for convenient food options right after the birth of our child, but we're also huge Food Network fans. Like, we literally do a fantasy draft against each other to pick the winner of Guys' Tournament of Champions. So we've really enjoyed the opportunity to get legit gourmet dining from some of our favorite celebrity chefs right in the comfort of our home. And true story, when we sat down for the first Cook Unity meal we had, she had Jose Garcis's beef, quinoa and kale enchilada. And I believe the words that came out of her mouth were, not going to lie, I'm impressed. Like, they're actually seasoned, unlike a lot of frozen meals we've had in the past. Some of my own favorite meals I've had are the beef bolognese from fellow Italian Fabio Viviani and the Korean flank steak rice bowl from Esther Choi. I've quickly become a huge fan of Cook Unity and their unmatched variety that you get to choose from and enjoy right at your home. And now you can get 50% off of your first order of Cook Unity meals. Go to cookunity.com/franchise50 and use my code franchise50 at checkout so that they know I sent you. You can check out these meals yourself. And thanks to Cook Unity for sponsoring today's deep dive. But let's circle back to the offensive coaching here for a second and break down what the Cowboys scheme looks like. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because the Cowboys really just run a nice, balanced pro-style offense. And having Dak Prescott is a big reason they're allowed to do that. Any offense in the NFL today is going to have a lot of modern principles and new twists that would be completely foreign to a quote-unquote pro-style offense that maybe Brian Schottenheimer would have grown up watching his dad run, right? But in terms of what a modern pro-style offense theoretically would look like, the Cowboys might be at the forefront of what that looks like to me, with a really good balance of under-center design, whether it's through the run game or through early down play action, a nice, well-distributed drop-back passing game as well, putting, in many cases, like a lot on the plate of the quarterback to have checks at the line and different adjustments you can make within the offense, as opposed to maybe being a little more simplified, college-y, I hate to say like dumbed down, but the NFL has adapted a lot of that type of stuff. This is the opposite of dumbed down. And when you have a quarterback like Dak Prescott that can be so multiple in terms of play calling and adjustments, why not do it? And why not embrace that? And they've done a really good job. And it's great that Brian Schottenheimer's been around so many different offenses and came up in more of a pro-style environment. So just, I think of like balance with the Cowboys offense. And the other thing is they are one of the more inside running centric run games in the NFL. They were well above league averages for inside zone, power, and counter, really mashing between the tackles inside a league that has really turned into this outside zone, run game oriented league. And it's not like the Cowboys never ran outside zone. They ran about 20% of the time. But that's a good 10% less on average than the rest of the league. The other thing Dallas does, back to some of that pro-style origin, is they'll use the fullback. They'll run I and power I formations, 21 and 22 personnel. They were one of the more 11 personnel focused teams, so they definitely prefer to live in that 3 wide receiver world. But when they wanted to really bully you up, they would lean towards having that fullback on the field quite a bit too, with someone like Hunter Lepke. So definitely more traditional in that sense, as well, as the fullback is a dying breed in the NFL today. But it is kind of funny that sort of modern pro style is such an anomaly in the NFL today, where so much of the league is either in kind of a Shanahan family tree or more of the like spread them out, kind of like Andy Reid, Sean Payton, modern pro spread style approach. But I think that gives the Cowboys something unique that not a lot of teams are prepared for, and the multiplicity of what they do just helps them stay adaptable and attack, defenses in certain ways and identify weaknesses and go right at them. So there is your offensive coaching here in Dallas. And then we have the hire of Christian Parker as the defensive coordinator, who obviously gets the green up arrow for me as a first-time defensive coordinator from a Fangio coaching tree. And as you would expect, if you've followed this series, like the defensive coach rankings, I can't rank Dallas that high. It's not like they had this strong foundation to build on from what we witnessed last year with one of the worst defenses in the league, and Christian Parker being the rookie DC. I like the hire. It's still a solid foundation. I've said it in multiple videos throughout this series. I don't think there's really a quote unquote bad defensive coach in the league right now as we head into the season. So even the defensive coaches that rank in the bottom tier for me, as the Cowboys do here, they're still solid rankings, a C+ grade there. But that is where the Cowboys are at. And Christian Parker, like, obviously is just going to have to prove what he's got here. But he does come from that proven Fangio scheme that is very well documented, that kind of 3-4 oriented front, more of a 2-4 style front, or 4-2, depending what you want to call it. But definitely the idea of maybe having some stand-up edges there that can occasionally drop into coverage and cause some confusion, some phantom pressures off of different looks with the multiplicity of a more mobile, athletic edge rusher like that. And then living in that split safety 2-shell world where you're going to start in a kind of base nickel, 2-high look, and post-snap rotate into any number of coverages. It's the core philosophy of a Vic Fangio defense, and you can certainly break down the defensive tendencies of a Vic Fangio defense and what you can mostly expect here, translating here under Christian Parker with Dallas. And as we pull this up, one thing that stands out to me that probably won't carry over, at least from last year's Eagles, is they ran a lot of man coverage. They ran the 8th most cover one man coverage in Philadelphia last year. Vic Fangio has always done an excellent job at looking at his players and asking what sort of coverages he can get away with running. And if he doesn't have the cornerbacks to run cover one, he's shown in the past that he won't do that. He would love the ability to be able to do that as he's built in Philadelphia. But I think if Christian Parker takes an honest look at this Cowboys secondary, and not to spoil that segment, but Christian Parker might come to that conclusion that we can't run a ton of cover one here, not yet. So if you take that 25% of cover one and expect maybe closer to like 15%, probably sticking another 10% into the different zone coverages, mostly cover three, I would expect, just because that is the post-snap single high rotation kind of variant of cover one, if you will. But another thing that's always stood out to me about Vic Fangio's defenses from a coverage angle is pretty consistently they do lead the league or are tops in the league in what ends up getting charted as cover six. And that's where I got to shout out Brett Coleman. Like he's done videos in the past about Fangio's defense and the different coverage rules and the real like X's and O's nitty gritty of like what that coverage means for Vic Fangio, where he can call cover six or whatever term you want to call it. And they have basically countless checks and balances that they can communicate pre and post snap to take care of whatever sort of formation or passing concept is getting thrown their way. So Christian Parker's ability to come in here and really coach that aspect of this defense up, get everybody on the same page, being able to make those really complicated checks and adjustments through their sort of cover six calls, which bleeds into their cover four calls as well. It all kind of meshes together in the kind of match off zone family of zone coverage calls. But Parker being someone with a defensive backs background, his ability to implement that aspect of this scheme is something you expect from him, and hopefully he can do that well. Some other notes on the Fangio scheme is they definitely don't like to blitz a lot if they don't have to, but when they do blitz, they're gonna freaking send it. The Eagles last year were 31st in total blitz rate, blitzing just 12% of the time, not even that, 11.9% of the time, but they were 11th in zero blitz calls. So just like so many of these modern defenses will do, when it's third down, they're gonna walk a bunch of guys up to the line. They're gonna create those amoeba fronts, try to create that confusion and improper slides. More often than not, only 4 guys will be coming. You just don't necessarily know who, and then you're gonna mix in, twists and pass rush games on top of that. But that's where some of that like 3-4 terminology comes in with having those stand-up edges that can actually drop into coverage from some of those, amoeba fronts and create some of that confusion, even if ultimately it is a four-man rush and not necessarily a blitz. But from time to time, quite literally 6.2% of the time, yeah, everybody's coming and you better get rid of that ball quickly, right? So definitely just leveraging the threat of the blitz to get similar results had you blitzed a bunch, but without actually leaving your coverage players left on an island and in trouble more often than not. And the last thing that can get brought up here is pretty low in base defense rate for the Eagles. 21st in the NFL for actually coming out in that base 3-4. Definitely a team and a scheme that wants to live in that nickel two-shell defense, and most prominently being able to do that because of the use of that big, strong slot cornerback. Cooper DeJean was the guy in Philadelphia, right? And here, they draft Caleb Downs, actually, at least for now, to be that slot corner that can actually have run fits and allow you to live in a nickel-based defense without getting gashed against the run. So those are going to be our big talking points on this Fangio scheme coming in here. It's obviously a very proven, often replicated system, but Christian Parker is going to have to prove he can handle it well, because there have been Vic Fangio disciples in the past, Ed Donatel, Joe Barry, Brandon Staley for a long time, that just thought you could just live in off zone and play scared, squishy defense the whole game and not know when to, be aggressive and dial up good blitzes. You obviously don't want Christian Parker to be one of those guys. You're hoping this is more going to be the Cowboys version of like Ejiro Evero, who Parker was actually with under Vic Fangio in Denver for a little bit. But there is your Cowboys coach and scheme breakdown. Largely a staff that I like. I think the Cowboys are in good hands here, even if these guys really across the board still have room to impress and to grow as a staff together here. But let's get into the good stuff now and break down this Cowboys roster. And we're going to start with the quarterback room, where with their offseason changes, they stay neutral. Really no change other than adding Sam Howell as a emergency QB3 here. But Dak Prescott, for me, heads into the season as the 7th ranked quarterback for me. I don't know just how much time we need to spend on the well-documented Dak Prescott, but I do feel like I'm as high on Dak Prescott, especially relative to like the football community, right? Like I feel very high on Dak Prescott. I don't know too many people are going to have him any higher than 7th, but I think he is one of the lone remaining like true field general quarterbacks. I think of like Joe Burrow and Matthew Stafford come to mind, where they're going to walk up to the line, they're going to read the defense, they're going to make checks. The pre-snap processing of a Dak Prescott and the command at the line of scrimmage, setting protections, picking up on the blitz, knowing where his hot reads are to go with the ball. Like it's impeccable with Dak, and he's a quarterback that feels like he's only getting better with age. And I think as we've seen less and less quarterbacks like Dak Prescott, right? Like Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan, those guys are all out of the game. Even like Kirk Cousins isn't even a starter anymore. The less and less of like these real pro-style field general types of QBs that we get, the more I think I come to appreciate the value of it and the value of Dak Prescott here. Now, I do think we largely like know what he is. A lot of the quarterbacks in this series around this range are going to have like a lot of, you look at the graphic, they're going to have a lot of glitter, up arrows, wild cards, yellow arrows, you name it. And if things go right for other quarterbacks, Dak might not end the season as the 7th best quarterback, but I think the floor he gives the team is tremendous. And like I said, we know what we're getting here. I think you can certainly point to like some of the relative limits to his game and why I say there might be some other quarterbacks that could pass him up this year. Like he's not an outrageous playmaker. He's very good. I think his kind of know-how to know when to use his feet and make plays when he needs to. It's gotten better throughout the years, but it's still not like elite playmaking. Also, like he's an aggressive decision maker for sure. Like there are some weeks where that pre-snap processor gets him burned, and maybe just maybe that develops to the point that like he is taking care of the football to an outrageous degree, like a peak Tom Brady or something like that. But like there's some weeks, and unfortunately those have tended to come against some of the better defenses, and like the Packers playoff game comes to mind. Like in some of the bigger moments, you've gotten these like real stinker games where Dak maybe, something was off with the film prep that week where he's not quite getting what he was expecting. And, maybe some of that ability to adjust off of that has hurt him at times. So like, I don't want to also sit here and be like, Dak's going to just drag the Cowboys to a Super Bowl and he's like this elite tier 1 QB. But I do think it's fascinating. Like if you really want to get into my QB tiers, Dak ended up the highest ranked quarterback for me in that tier 3, which is a quarterback that you obviously pay, and with the right infrastructure, you can win a Super Bowl with. Whereas tier 2 is more of that, like where Matthew Stafford's been the majority of his career, where like Justin Herbert kind of is, where it's like, no, he's more going to like uplift things, kind of like drag more of an average team into the playoffs, and a quarterback that in a 10-year window you expect to win a Super Bowl with. Dak to me is like doing this dance over the perimeter of like tier 3, tier 2, and he's been doing it for like the last 2 years for me. Some of it's been health, and some of it has just been like 2 steps forward, 1 step back with some of these ugly games, and like, getting over the edge to be more of like, show some more of that playoff success and that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, the last time we saw Dak in the playoffs, it was extremely ugly and one of the worst games we've seen from Dak in a long time. So like, while I said Dak might not be a whole lot better than this, I do think in year 2 with Schottenheimer, with these receivers that we're going to look at here in a minute, if he can stay healthy as well and follow up one of the best years of his career from last season, we might see him more in that like tier 2 coded range moving forward. That might still leave him as the 7th QB in the league, but he himself, for like looking at where he kind of lands, I think it's a fascinating year for him in that sense. But that's all kind of minutia, nitty gritty football nerd shit. The Cowboys are in really good hands with Dak Prescott, and as long as the rest of this team takes care of business, he is undoubtedly a good enough quarterback for the Cowboys to win a Super Bowl with. I do believe that. Now you do have Joe Milton as the backup, a developing uber athletic QB with one of the strongest arms you'll ever see. We got that week 18 start from him in 2024, and it was like, like maybe something clicked with Joe Milton with a year of coaching and development in the NFL. That was with the Patriots. Cowboys liked what they saw. They went and traded for him. We got another week 18 start this year, and it sure as hell was not as pretty. There's no denying the traits, but I definitely would not expect them be able to really win a lot of games with Joe Milton. He's more in that project category, even if the traits are absurd. And then you do have Sam Howell, who's started his fair share of games, but talk about being overrated for passing volume from his Commanders season. He is the definition of a reckless quarterback, even if he can make some plays and get hot for a couple quarters and maybe pull you ass backwards into a win or two. But yeah, there's your quarterback room. Again, ranking 7th for me. Very respectable QB ranking for Dak and the Dallas Cowboys. But let's keep going through this roster. And next up, we have the running back position, where the Cowboys legit made no changes. So staying neutral there, just as they were at quarterback. But last year was a huge, call it green light season for Javonte Williams, where this running back room was just a tremendous question mark for the Cowboys. And, it was between Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders. Like, was anyone going to play well? Could Javonte stay healthy? Even if he did, what version of Javonte were we going to get? Because even when he had played for the Broncos in years before that, he looked maybe like the injuries had caught up with him a little bit. And then last year, at least for many parts of last year, he looked like that young version of Javonte Williams that we were all so excited about him as a highly drafted rookie coming out of North Carolina. And he gets a contract extension off of that. Not a massive one. It was a 3-year, $24 million contract that's really a 2-year, $12 million extension with a third team option at the back end of it. So like his record of unavailability and questionable play at times certainly baked into that, to the fact that he was actually like a relatively affordable extension for Dallas, which was a big luxury as long as he can stay healthy again, because God damn, they need a running back here. They have nobody else to really lean on, and they did lean on Javonte last year. And like I said, he held up, and he was in the top 15 for missed tackle force rate, which has always really been the selling point on Javonte Williams. He's got that bowling ball of needles style where he's compact and runs low to the earth, and guys just bounce off of him. And there was definitely some games where like he was really a tough player to stop, and he was playing with his hair on fire. He was playing like, he had an opportunity here and a chance to make some big time money on an extension. But the Cowboys were able to lean on him for a career high, almost 300 touches last season. And it was great to see that, he can still play at a really high level. And he's done an excellent job to rehab through all of his different injuries and get his body into a position where he can be an efficient, really good kind of top 15 to top 20 or so running back. But unfortunately, if we're being realistic about it, like, to be able to expect him to repeat that and stay healthy and his body to not break down with that much of a workload, it just is not consistent with what he has been throughout his career. And again, that's why the contract was so much lower for him. And you put 2 and 2 together, and you can obviously make the statement that he's a big wild card again for the Cowboys this season. Fortunately, it's not the case where last year, like I said, it was not only can he stay healthy, but is he good anymore? We know he's good. Can he stay healthy? That's going to be a big question with Javonte Williams. And honestly, if he does stay healthy, I've got an 81 rating on him as a back. The Cowboys come in 21st to 27th with him here. If he can prove to stay healthy again, I'm willing to buy into him more like long-term here as closer to like a top 10 to 15 running back sustainable into the future. Overall, I love what I saw, but I think it is fair as a neutral bystander trying to be objective about all these teams. I think it's fair to be kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and a little bit hesitant that he can follow it up again. Now, if anything were to happen to Javonte Williams, the Cowboys might be in trouble, and they might end up going to like see what other options would be out there in that situation. But that's not to say I'm not interested in Jaden Blue. And, I wasn't a huge fan of Jaden Blue as a prospect. He barely got his touches at Texas. And granted, it's hard to get touches in a backfield at Texas. But when he did, I thought the vision, like he was kind of your classic scat back, like not really a lot to like on a down to down, like between the tackles rushing basis. But he comes to Dallas last year and he dealt with a lot of injuries, like heading into the season. And it took him a long time to like actually get some touches here. And the injuries were just kind of on and off throughout the season. But week 18, he goes out there, gets the start. And I ended up watching all of those carries just because I was really curious. Him as the kind of lead back in an inside-oriented run game. What did that look like with Jaden Blue as a rookie? And it was enough for me to like definitely be intrigued and open my eyes to the fact that like he is potentially developing the vision and the ability to run through arm tackles. I usually don't love these smaller backs, especially ones that really weren't productive in college, and I thought probably should have gone back to school for another year. But recent history of Dalvin Cook, Devon Achane, Jahmyr Gibbs to an extent, like recent history of these smaller backs in the modern NFL having the success that they've had has forced me to like be more open-minded with a guy like Jaden Blue that he has potential. So if we see a larger workload with him, I'm certainly intrigued. I saw enough in that week 18 start to say, all right, there's something there. There's more on that tape than I ever saw from him between the tackles at Texas. And there might be an opportunity for him to get a hell of a decent amount, a lot of carries here. Not just obviously if Javonte gets hurt, but if the Cowboys maybe want to preserve Javonte a little bit more, get him into that, second, maybe third year of that contract with some better durability. Maybe if Jaden Blue's good and mixing in kind of a change of pace option, maybe they look at this and it's like, hey, there's skill set similarities between Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery with these two guys. Let's create our own little Sonic and Lightning approach here.
That's not how the Force works.
That's obviously we're a long ways from that, but I'm definitely interested in a potential breakout for Jaden Blue this year, especially because he dealt with so many injuries last year. After that, though, I'm really not interested in these guys. Phil Maffa was really an oversized, plodding back. When the thoughts of you being a poor man's A.J. Dillon enter my mind, it's not a good place to be. Malik Davis, as an RB3, has gotten some touches here, and he just lacks those standout traits. But I would imagine he's probably your most trustworthy option after Javonte Williams. Currently, they pick up Izzy Abanikanda, who's just bounced around the league. This guy's got so much talent, but there's something missing at this point. He's been on how many NFL rosters? It's at least 4 now, if not more than that, in as many years. So yeah, Jaden Blue is really the only guy I'm fascinated in as a backup to help you out if something were to happen to Javonte Williams. But with Blue being so unproven and Williams still in my mind being a wild card there, this running back room does get a little bit tough to rank. And in my mind, it's definitely a little uncertain sort of what the backfield is going to prove to look like this season. It could be really good and break through as a top half backfield in the league, or this could be more of a problem area for Dallas. But let's go to the weaponry here, and I'll probably circle back and hint at some of the pass catching ability of these backs a little bit more here as well. But let's look at their offseason changes at wide receiver and tight end. So at wide receiver, they do lose Jalen Tolbert in free agency. He goes to Miami, a moderate loss, nothing to really sweat. They add Marquez Valdez-Scantling, talking about playing for a bunch of different teams. It's almost becoming a meme at this point of teams looking at their roster saying, we need a vertical threat. Oh, MVS is available. Let's sign him. Just hasn't been able to hold on to a job now for Saints, Bills. I think he was in Pittsburgh last year with Aaron Rodgers. Now he's here. All right, pretty unsubstantial addition with where he's at in his career. And then Anthony Smith, a 7th round dart throw there. So, the loss of Jalen Tolbert isn't enough for me to say that they downgraded at wide receiver, but I certainly don't think they upgraded either. I said neutral there, and then really neutral at tight end as well. The only footnote there is they added Michael Trigg as a priority free agent, who I'll talk about here. But yeah, staying neutral at weaponry, which is just fine when they were as good as they were last year, and I have them ranked tied for 2nd in the NFL, 2nd to 3rd with an A grade for their pass catchers here in Dallas. This is the definitive strength of the Dallas Cowboys. And if they're going to shatter this 19th ranking, it's because they're going to have one of the most prolific passing games in the league. And obviously that centers around having the 2nd best wide receiver duo in the league between CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens, just a rare duo, a pair of guys that, especially after George Pickens really broke through last year, had his best season, a pair of guys that could easily operate as the number 1 receiver on their respective team. And you get both these guys, and their skill sets really complement each other well. CeeDee Lamb to me he would complement any room well because he is that true elite alpha tier wide receiver that to me is you have to check so many boxes in a league flooded with good wide receivers. You got to check so many boxes for me to put you in that tier 1. You have to be able to play inside and out, separate running routes to all 3 levels. You got to have great hands. You got to win tough catches and be a threat after the catch. I really look for all of those things to be a tier 1 wide receiver for me. CD checks all those boxes. His production the last 2 years, and some of this has been, he's gotten banged up a little bit, but he hasn't been able to sustain those 1,500 to 1,800 yard seasons like he had when he was really breaking through, making an argument for who the best wide receiver in the league was. He's been passed up by some of these other names around the NFL, but that's not to take away what a healthy CeeDee Lamb brings to the table. And I guess outside of being a little banged up at times, there's been some drops these last 2 years that you need to call out in some big spots. He does have 19 drops, almost a 10% drop rate over the last 2 years. Honestly, we were at a point in time with Jamar Chase where he was more around this 94, 95 mark. And I just said, we got to clean up those drops. You can't be that inconsistent in that sense and push being, closer to a 99 in my mind, for example. That's obviously not the difference between, 1,800 yards in 2023 when his drop rate was 4%. 3 or 4 drops isn't the difference in 700 yards, for example. And maybe with George Pickens eating into that target share, we aren't talking about CeeDee Lamb needing an 1,800 yard season. But from an efficiency standpoint, eliminating some of those drops would certainly help. And that's probably the one thing you look at with him as a area to improve. But yeah, CeeDee's effing awesome. For my money, he's still the 5th best wide receiver in the NFL. And again, in that tier 1 of elite wide receivers. Then you now have George Pickens in the mix here. And Pickens just put it all together last year after being awesome in Pittsburgh. I really think improved in some of his areas of deficiency, drops, especially 2024 were a big issue for him. The contested catch win rate for him. Like I've always said, George Pickens, he's like the definitive 99 spectacular catch rating. Like he can make some of the most batshit crazy catches you'll ever see. But his contested catch win rate in the 2 years prior to what we saw last year in Dallas, 32%, 37%, so not as consistent in that area. He jumps up to 56.5% last year, so consistently high pointing the ball, muscling defenders up for those catches. And the run after catch ability for George Pickens has really evolved from what he was as a prospect at Georgia through his time in Pittsburgh. I mean, the first 2 years in Pitt, he has 7 missed tackles forced. I think we saw some of those flashes of some of that creative running style really showing up in 2024. He breaks through with 21 missed tackles forced last year, almost 500 yards after the catch last year, adding a whole nother way that he wins beyond just put the ball in my area and I'm going to make some crazy catches happen. You add that to the fact that he did become a more dependable wide receiver with the drops and the contested catch win rate, and you end up with this version of George Pickens that is absolutely worth paying for Dallas. Definitely makes trading a 3rd round pick for him look like just a remarkable trade and value for Dallas. Yet again, this front office remains underrated in my opinion. The Jerry Jones of it all is a cloud over what is otherwise one of the more well-run front offices in the league, in my opinion. And things could still change, but also the fact that there's been no off-field drama for a guy that was kind of the fear, is this guy's kind of a quirky, unique personality, I would say. But I don't get the sense that Pickens has ill intent or anything like that. And it's really funny to look at the fact that a big part of why Pittsburgh wanted DK Metcalf over George Pickens is they thought the off-field character was going to be better with DK. DK punches a fan and gets suspended for the rest, the end of their season. It's been relatively quiet with George Pickens, and there's not really been any contract drama here, right? That was definitely my cold open for this video and expected. And it's just been great vibes with Pickens here. It's been a seamless fit with him here. So you put these two guys together and it almost doesn't matter who else you have here. That's going to be one of the best groups of weapons in the NFL. But it's nice that they have adequate players to fill in the rest of this thing. I think you go to Jake Ferguson next. Jake Ferguson is definitely on that list of just archetype, nice possession tight ends, someone that you maybe wish was a little bit better as a blocker, but is super reliable as an underneath target. Just kind of that thorn in the defense's side when they're busy dealing with CeeDee Lamb, catching double teams, and George Pickens doing all of George Pickens things. God, and we got to worry about tackling Jake Ferguson on a stick route on 3rd and 8 when we know Dak Prescott will find him. He's just the perfect third piece in there. Use him when you need him, but you don't need to funnel targets to him. At times they've had to really lean on Jake Ferguson, and he felt kind of that lack of a number 2. Obviously, George Pickens has brought that, to say the least. So Ferguson filling in as a 3 is great. And then Ryan Flournoy is your wide receiver 3. Will get an increased opportunity here with Jalen Tolbert leaving in free agency. Flournoy got to play a decent amount last year. CeeDee Lamb dealt with an injury last year, and Flournoy made the most of those opportunities. And he's interesting to me. Like, I think I've told this story a million times, but I think it contextualizes Flournoy as a prospect and young NFL player. I was down at the Senior Bowl, and he just had he's from like Southeast Missouri State or Mississippi. I should probably get this right for the Red Hawk fans out there, for Southeast Missouri State, but definitely a helmet I did not recognize down there at the Senior Bowl. But 6'2", rocked up, like 205 plus pound guy. Fills out his jersey well. I was joking with whoever I was sitting next to at the time. I was like, oh, I didn't know Julio Jones was out here playing at the Senior Bowl. Like, in the red helmet, I think he was wearing number 11 as well, which provoked that thought. But he really just looked the part of a, physical freak. And you find a guy out of Southeast Missouri State, usually it's the physical tools that'll have a guy stand out like that. So there's no lack of tools and upside. Obviously, coming from a lower level of competition, he's had to earn his way up as a 6th round pick, but got those opportunities last year and ended up with 40 catches, almost 500 yards. Showed off, how his play strength can play after the catch. Won some tough catches. Like, there's real upside for him to be a piece. I don't need to go too far here and say he's going to be like the best number 3 wide receiver in the league, or even project this crazy good season, because there's just not that many targets that are going to go his way as long as the rest of these guys are healthy. But I do think he's some of the most fascinating, like, immediate wide receiver depth that teams have. And as a 4th guy to get involved here from time to time, absolutely, has some intrigue there. You also have Kevontae Turpin, who can get utilized as a gadget player. Vertical threat at times. He hasn't really been able to break through from just being that gadget role player as one of the best return men in the league, one of the fastest players in the NFL. But they'll mix him around with Flournoy as that third wide receiver. And then you've got Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I've seen a lot of comments that say take a shot every time TFG mentions Marquez Valdes-Scantling. That's because he really is the poster boy for like the unreliable, like textbook vertical threat. So, that's what he's here to do. If he can still run fast, you put him out there off of play action, have him run the post, be the alert. If the safety carries CeeDee Lamb on the crossing route, you're going to chuck it deep to MVS. And then in which case he'll probably be wide open, but there's a 50% chance he catches the ball. That's been the story of MVS's career. That's literally all he does, but that is a valuable skill set. It's why he keeps getting these opportunities. Anthony Smith was a 7th round pick. I actually didn't get to. Maybe he surprises. Seems to have a relatively balanced profile. So we'll see what we get there. Jonathan Mingo. Okay, we gave this team credit for trading a 3rd round pick to get George Pickens. Pretty wild when you contextualize that it was a 4th round pick that they traded for Jonathan Mingo. Complete opposite ends of the spectrum for a relatively close pick value there. You got Tyler Johnson, journeyman at this point. The last wide receiver I'll mention is Jordan Hudson, undrafted pickup out of SMU, cracked my initial top 20 wide receiver rankings from like January, ended up sliding down to 23 for me, just didn't have a great pre-draft process, ran a 4.58, didn't get to show out too much. But I'm still want to bet on the film. I thought he was a pretty balanced wide receiver prospect that made some tough catches, had a little bit of after the catch juice. My high-end pro comp on him was like Rashad Bateman for what he's turned into be for the Ravens. Maybe some drop issues that frustrate you at times, but gonna have a hard time cracking the 53. But he's close to home. Played at SMU. Maybe hangs around in the practice squad, and in time, like the further he gets removed from a rough pre-draft process, maybe there's something there. But there's your wide receivers. Where do we go next here? I guess the pass catchers, like Javonte with his contact balance and is an excellent pass blocker. As long as he's healthy and you want to lean on him, he's a very useful 3rd down back in just sort of the check and release, pass blocking duties that you want to ask of him. Jaden Blue would be the one that if you want to be a little bit more dynamic and versatile, like running maybe empty with Jaden Blue out there as a wide receiver, which I would imagine they're not going to shy away from the possibility of doing that with the Dak Prescott, who can spread them out and pick you apart in that way. Blue was a good prospect as a pass catching back with a ton of juice. I think he's got like 4.34 speed or something like that. Like there's stuff to maybe be unlocked there. So I'm really not just with him as a runner, but as maybe getting a larger work share as a pass catcher now that he's healthy could absolutely be another, point of frustration for opposing defenses to have to deal with his athleticism on top of all this other stuff. So that's a good thing there. And then you have your tight end depth. Like Brevin Spanford's a really nice smashing tight end too. Kind of broke through last year in that role. The Cowboys don't run a ton of 12 personnel. Brevin Spanford's going to play 20-25% of snaps. But when they really have to have it in the run game, they'll bring him out. He's a red zone threat as well, but not much by way of, pass catching weaponry. Luke Schoonmaker, overdraft that has never really developed. He's realistically probably been what he always should have been projected as just, decent NFL tight end depth. If the run blocking ever developed for him, it'd be a different conversation, but it hasn't. And then you get fullback. Hunter Lepke is actually one of the better kind of like utility fullbacks in the league. Has had some fun moments for this team. You've also got Michael Trigg, was an undrafted pickup there. Really brutal reports in terms of like his football character, like being late to practice, not listening to coaches, that kind of stuff. Like highly recruited guy that goes from USC to Ole Miss. And then when he ended up, transferring out of Ole Miss, a lot of teams just kind of decided that they don't really want anything to do with him. But he settled in at Baylor and, made some plays as a pass catcher. He's a thick, rocked up, like utility tight end. It couldn't give a shit less as a run blocker, which kind of leaves him as this kind of like, tweener of a receiving entity. But he's made some impressive plays and has that recruiting background. So if you can get him to focus, maybe there's something there if he even makes the team. DJ Rogers as well was picked up as a priority free agent. There's not really a lot of upside there to be anything more than a backup tight end in the NFL, but I think I had a late day 3 grade on him that, could have been drafted. But yeah, there are your Dallas Cowboys pass catchers. It goes without saying, but yeah, like this unit's freaking sweet. It's a core driver of what the Cowboys got going on in tandem with Dak Prescott. If the Cowboys are to exceed this 19th ranking and have a big season, it's going to be through the air and center around these guys. Now, there is still one very important core aspect of what's shaping up to look like a really good Cowboys offense here, and that is, to me, a very polarizing, in many ways, one-sided offensive line to break down here real quick. As we look at their offseason changes, not much. Like they're running it back with the same core group. The only loss is Brock Hoffman, who has been a nice like backup slash, replacement level starter interior piece for them. So it's a loss, but not a starter. And then as far as additions go, really just a 4th round pick on a developmental tackle in Drew Shelton out of Penn State. But I did say neutral at offensive line there at the end of the day. As I mentioned, though, it's a very split offensive line, a very volatile, one-sided unit here that ultimately comes out as my 17th ranked offensive line, which in some ways feels low because there's a lot to like with this group, and they actually came out top 5 for me for run blocking, ranking 3rd to 5th there, but damn near at the bottom for pass blocking, 30th to 31st, with a ton of questions for how well this team can buy time for Dak Prescott. And definitely that pass blocking is a huge wild card here, not just in the sense that there is upside, there is room certainly for them to finish much better than being the 30th to 31st ranked unit for pass blocking, but a huge wild card for the overall offense when the passing game is a lot of what you think of with this team being so dynamic with Dak and these pass catchers. Well, pass blocking is a huge part of being able to push the ball downfield. So really, really an important discussion here. Let's go through it left to right. And by far the biggest unknown and the biggest wild card for this offensive line is that left tackle, Tyler Guyton, one of the 3 Tylers recently drafted in the first round here on the offensive line by the Cowboys, but without a doubt the worst of the three Tylers as he heads into his third season. And Guyton was a project, volatile, boomer bust type of traits-based developmental prospect. And you can get a pretty low floor with some guys like this that were not particularly good, honestly, in college, that had a lot of warts on their film, that had a lot to clean up with their technique. And we've seen him struggle through this when he's been on the field, and that hasn't even been for the full course of either of his first two seasons. Year one, it was largely like he just wasn't good enough and consistent enough to keep in the starting lineup. Last year, it felt like they were going to power through it, but he got injured week 12 and didn't return the rest of the season. So he's played like just over a full season's worth of snaps through 2 years, 1,300 snaps. You're usually getting about 1,100 snaps from an offense in a season or so. So that's where we're at with Tyler Guyton. We haven't really seen any amount of sustained success. I would say very minimal improvements, and I think he was playing his best ball before the injury. Granted, the pass rushes he was going against were Carolina, Washington, Denver. Good game against Denver, but then Arizona and Las Vegas. You always got to be a little bit careful with, small sample size guys that maybe finish strong, but was it just, in reality, when week 1, week 2, week 4, he had to go against Philly, the Giants, and the Packers, he was awful. And he was awful. Like, it could just be a matchup thing. So it's good. You'd rather he played his best ball, like, before he got hurt than the other way around. And I think from a run blocking standpoint, he was starting to mesh with this offense a little bit. So, like, if you're talking about him showing some incremental growth since he got drafted, I think the consistency of sticking on blocks in the run game is a positive. He's physically talented. He was always going to be probably a 3 or a 4 year project considering what he was coming out of college. But I used the hot seat logo with this guy, like I did with Xavier Legette and do with some head coaches. Like, it's shit or get off the pot this year for Tyler Guyton. You're playing left tackle for Dak Prescott, who's entering his mid-30s, someone that wants to stand in the pocket and beat you from the pocket. You gotta be better than a bottom 4 starting tackle in the league across the board, but especially in pass protection. So I'm not necessarily projecting him to get better. I was never a huge fan of Tyler Guyton. Even if he does get better, is it going to be incremental improvements? I was in like my mock drafts and stuff, entertaining the idea of trying to replace Tyler Guyton, kind of getting ahead of it early. It reminds me a lot like Braxton Jones for the Steelers, where eventually they just realized like he's just not going to figure it out. I hope that's not the case with Tyler Guyton. I really don't. I'm not necessarily betting on him, but he's a huge wild card. I can't count him out either. So we'll see what they get there. The rest of it's in a better spot. Like, you got Tyler Smith at left guard. He's the best piece here. He's kind of a Pro Bowl caliber guard, a really outstanding run blocker. He's been more beatable as a pass blocker than, compared to his dominant run block tape, where he does have some of the best like highlight reels for an offensive lineman with his athleticism. He's got the nastiness. He's really clicked in that phase. I wouldn't say he's a bad pass blocker. It's not that he's invulnerable, that you can't get him, but like, you love what you have at left guard in Tyler Smith. You have Cooper Beebe here in year 3. He's been really steady since he came in, and he did get a little bit better from year 1 to year 2. I did put the up arrow on him. I believe in his trajectory here to maybe, I think it's just a big third year to like really announce just how good is Cooper Beebe. Not that he can't get better from year 3 onward, but he is age 25 now. I think this is about where his prime should be. Now in the second year of this offense, he missed some time last year. So just getting fully acclimated now with Tyler Smith and Tyler Booker locked in next to him as well. He's a big, strong, mauling center. Makes a ton of sense in this inside zone oriented run game, just to create that movement, drive guys off the ball. He's gettable in pass protection. There's certainly some areas that he can prove to be a little bit better in terms of blitz pickup and anticipating things a little bit better, keeping those feet moving, all that good stuff. But he's a really solid ascending young center with a big third year ahead of him to announce, like, okay, is he just going to be a really quality, solid starter, or is there another step to be more like top 10 caliber here? I think is on the fringe of his upside. And then you got Tyler Booker, their first round pick from last season, who was as advertised as a rookie. He was a really high floor guard prospect, some of the best hands I've ever seen at the position, just really gritty, smart interior offensive lineman. He clicked immediately for an offense running a lot of inside zone. Like he is such a good inside zone blocker. He got a lot of criticism because he's not that great of an athlete. People thought this was an overdraft. I still thought it was a really solid, reasonable pick, especially for an offense like this. Like, yeah, I don't want him reach blocking and getting out in space a whole lot, but he will get off the ball. He's a sticky, powerful blocker off the line. And he has incredible football awareness to know how long you need to stay attached on those combo blocks, when to peel off, have that accurate targeting system to get to the second level. There's just a lot of like timing and feel to be a good inside zone blocker, on top of wanting to be probably stronger versus being that great athlete. Obviously, both are important. But like wide zone, you're going to lean more towards athleticism. Inside zone, you're going to lean more towards mauling play strength. So he's a great fit here. Pass protection, like some of the slower feet can get him at times. Still young. I think he can learn to work around his athletic deficiencies here in the NFL and continue to get better. But he was a really good first round pick, and you got a really rock solid interior trio there. But then you get to right tackle and you get back to this kind of like pass block versus run block conversation with the Cowboys. Terrence Steele is one of these like uber one-dimensional tackles where he's gotten, paid pretty well. He's gotten decent respect as like a starting tackle. It's almost exclusively because he's been a really good run blocker. And at times he's been, I don't know, maybe top 8-ish as a run blocking tackle. Like he is massive. He's got the strength. He's got that dickhead mentality in the run game. He's a good fit for an inside focused run game like we described with Booker. But he really is like one of the worst pass blocking tackles in the NFL. And he's gotten Dak freaking killed at times. And like 2023 was a nightmare for him. He had a prove it year in 2024 and improved a little bit in 2024 to the point that they were willing to stand by him because the run blocking was still so good. And then last year, he probably was, kind of in the middle of that disaster 2024 season and being closer to acceptable, but still like below average in that 2024 season. So like, he's a big reason why you have this massive split between pass blocking and run blocking. It's not just him, like all 5 of these guys are better run blockers than pass blockers. But Steele, it's really pronounced. And you pair that with questions at left tackle, and you really do have, I would say, the worst pass protecting tackle tandem in the league as we head into the start of this season, which is going to, at least heading into the year, like project is holding the Cowboys back in some ways. Hopefully Tyler Guyton can take that leap, and that's not necessarily the case. But yeah, you've got questions in that sense, and it's not like you have anybody that you're excited about stepping in and maybe salvaging this, right? And this is a big reason. Like I was maybe trying to be active for the Cowboys to get a tackle early in this draft. And I'll even go a step further and say I think there's a chance that the Cowboys even regret not going with like a Maxi Honitshore, who ended up going with the pick after they were originally picking, or like a Caleb Lomu, and could have been also like being a little more aggressive to come up for like a Monroe Freeling or Blake Miller as well, which went a couple picks before Dallas. We'll talk about Malachi Lawrence being that pick when we get to the D-line as well, obviously, but that's just a little take baked into here as well. I think there is a chance that this tackle situation limits the ceiling of this passing game, and they are looking for certainly not just one, but potentially 2 if they reach a point where they're like, Steele's a great run blocker, but we just can't live with this as one of the worst pass blocking right tackles in the league. There's a chance that they're looking for some more tackle help after this year when they had a chance to get it. But the guys that they do have are Nate Thomas, who's a smashing, run block oriented tackle, surprise, like kind of a poor man's version of Terrence Steele. 7th round pick in 2024 that's had to play a little bit here, and it just hasn't been pretty, especially from a pass blocking perspective when he's been out there. Drew Shelton is the tackle that they quote unquote invested in. He's a 4th round developmental traits-based tackle. I don't think he has like tremendous traits to develop, but he's relatively athletic. He had decent tape at Penn State, but inconsistent. I think he had just kind of the bare minimum. When you watch a tackle, you want to see the requisite kick slide depth, foot speed, length in their arms, to be able to leave a guy on an island as a tackle. I think Drew Shelton had the requisite athletic ability to do that. I wouldn't say it was great in terms of the assessing that, but there could be something there if they develop it well. And then they have a Johnny Cornelius out of Oregon here. It's just not good tackle depth really at all. And then you go to the interior offensive line depth. I do like TJ Bass. He's another smasher. Like they love get off the bus guys, like run block oriented offensive linemen that particularly aren't overly athletic. They obviously have a type here. So TJ Bass in that category as a quality backup. Nick Leverett was a starting center in a Tom Brady offense once upon a time, but slowly lost that job. Trevor Keegan here was a 5th round pick from the Eagles, maybe has some tools to develop, but outside of TJ Bass and maybe Drew Shelton surprising as a 4th round rookie tackle, not much offensive line depth at all. So got to keep these guys healthy for sure. But you take that very split 17th ranked offensive line that's near the top of the league for run blocking, near the bottom of the league for pass blocking. You put it together with the rest of this offense that we've talked about. Well, where do they rank as an offense heading into the year? Still very favorable, even though we ended on more of a questionable note with the O-line there. They came out as my 11th ranked overall offense, 5th in passing game, and 15th in run game. And honestly, there's just 2 core question marks here with this offense. They're already pushing top 10, but as I've said countless times in the series, we're ranking these teams and these units and these players closer to their floor. So if there's going to be more question marks, you're going to come in a little bit lower, obviously. You got one very clear question mark with the passing game. Like, just find a way to be okay as a pass blocking unit. And you're probably going from 5th in passing game to at least top 3. And then the run game, it's like the running back ranking for me was 21st to 27th, but that was an interesting conversation, right? Where like, do we fully trust Javonte Williams? That's a tough one. Like if you get last year's version of Javonte Williams, that's a little bit better. You're probably pushing a top 10 run game with a really good run blocking offensive line in front of you. So there's definitely a path for them to be top 10 for both pass game and run game. Just got to hit some of those green lights there, but that's a pretty exciting path for Dallas, right? Like we know this is an offensive oriented team. We broke down a couple of those warts, but this could really be one of the best offenses in the league if a couple things that we talked about there come together. But let's flip over to the defensive side of the thing. A unit that really struggled last year, so much so that they were actually the 32nd ranked defense by DVOA last year with some really low lows. There was points in the season where I was comparing the Cowboys to like, oh, this is the NFC Bengals, where if you could just give them an adequate defense, they're putting up 30-something points a game some of these weeks because they have to. So the Cowboys pushed a lot of buttons this offseason to hopefully just get this defense to creep back towards normalcy. And go in the right direction there to give this team more of a chance to win games. But with a lot of moving pieces, we got a lot to talk about here. So let's look at their offseason changes on the defensive line. And it wasn't all additions for Dallas. They actually moved Osa Odigizua, who really fulfilled that interior D-line as one of the best in the league. Gave them a little bit of extra there next to Quinnen Williams and Kenny Clark. Not necessarily a fit here with a defense that's gonna struggle in a Vic Fangio system to get 3 interior defensive linemen on the field at the same time. They send him off to San Francisco. Definitely a big loss for the Cowboys defense. They also say goodbye to Solomon Thomas, more whatever there, even though he's he's hung around and played okay, considering he was a huge first-round bust. But as far as additions, like, you have to count Quinnen Williams there, who was acquired midseason and actually missed some time for Dallas. On top of that, he only played a quarter of this team's snaps last year, so he's definitely an addition, getting probably triple that snap count this year from him. And then some more minor additions: Otito Agbanya, Jonathan Bullard, and a 4th-round pick in LT Overton, who's going to bulk up and slide inside here. Tough to say upgraded, downgraded on that, because Osa's a loss, but you didn't really get a whole lot of Quinnen Williams on this team last year, and we saw the impact he made when he arrived. So really just focusing on that, I just took the coward's way out and said neutral for interior D-line, which is better than nothing when you are losing a player like Osa Odigizua. But on the edge, I did say upgraded. They bring in Rashawn Gary. They trade for him from Green Bay. Bit of a surprise that Green Bay was able to get something for him. It was assumed he was going to be a cap casualty. And then they draft Malachi Lawrence in the first round there. They also add Charles Snowden, who it was just announced as of this recording today that he's going to be suspended for 3 games. He was a roster bubble guy anyway. As far as losses, you're losing Jadeveon Clowney and Dante Fowler, who did play well for this team, but only a third of this team's snaps for both of those guys. And then also a note there is Maurice Luafau, who's been a rough watch at linebacker, is actually going to bulk up and play the edge for this team this year. So he gets added to that edge group as well, taken away from the linebacker room. So I did say upgraded at edge, and also just have to mention as well, like, rest in peace, Marshawn Kneeland tragically took his life in the middle of this team's season. And just take care of yourself, guys. Take care of your friends. Check in on your friends. You just never know. But obviously, they have the tragic loss of Marshawn Kneeland there. Anyway, let's talk about this defensive line here. It's a pretty good looking unit on paper, right? They come in as my 10th to 12th overall defensive line. Really good for run defense. They rank 3rd to 5th for D-line run support. And then kind of good, but middle of the pack for pass rush, 14th to 18th with that B grade there. But it's a wild card unit for me, because it's kind of a whirlwind unit. You've got some guys trending down, getting older. You've got definitely some young players that you're hoping to get even more from. So, like, the floor is really nice with this defensive line. But it's a wild card in the sense of, like, if you can get the best case scenario in a lot of these cases, this could end up being maybe closer to like top 7 or 8, like get some incremental growth there. I don't know that anyone's expecting a top 5 defensive line from this unit. That'd be pretty surprising. Maybe not impossible. But let's start with the interior D line, because this is the core power of this unit. You have Quinnen Williams is your best player here. They go and trade a couple of first-round picks for him mid-season, and you could really feel the impact he made right away. They just felt like a much more functional defense, getting to craft things around him. And I think the biggest difference he makes is like just shutting shit down on early downs. Like, he is a top 3 interior run defending D lineman. He is strong enough to hold the point of attack. He gets off blocks. He's really athletic. He's got a great targeting system. He's got like instincts to make these plays from the backside. That just automatically uplifted the floor of the Cowboys defense, where at least they weren't getting gashed on the ground every single week. And then you also dropped this team's best pass rusher into the mix with Quinnen Williams. As a pass rusher, I would say that's where, and I even argued putting the yellow arrow on Quinnen Williams. I don't really know exactly, like, he's a tough player to rank as a pass rusher. I don't know exactly where to come in there, because I always talk about wanting that Batman, right? That true number 1 that you have to double team. If you don't, he's going to consistently destroy one-on-one blocks. And he's good enough that you're going to double team him, and you can build your pass rush plan with stunts and blitzes around slides going to this player. And yeah, more often than not, Quinnen Williams is going to get double teamed. That's definitely true. When your best player is an interior D lineman, that's typically going to be the case. But like, is he what Chris Jones has been? Is he what Jeffrey Simmons was last year, where if he does get one-on-one, because it's going to happen, does he just embarrass offensive linemen? Does he consistently dominate and end up with that high-end number one defensive lineman production? Quinnen Williams hasn't been that guy the last 2 years. He's been a really freaking good interior rusher, but his just overall like ability to win, rack up pressures, impact the game, finish sacks, I would say he's been more at a really quality number 2 level as a pass rusher. Now you pair that with the fact that he's a top 3 run defending interior D lineman, and that's a superstar. Like, that is a top, I have to really create a list, I guess, but 5 to 8 interior D lineman. Also matters if Aaron Donald's coming out of retirement. God damn it. But like, good trade. I think in a vacuum, I would trade 2 first-round picks for Quinnen Williams for what it is. It gets a little murky when like you just acquired 2 first-round picks for Micah Parsons, who's a better player. It is all just kind of wild the way they went about it. But we're assessing the team that they have here. I think you can justify paying what they paid to bring him in here, and getting a full season of him should hopefully just like raise the floor so much. Like I said, they were the 32nd ranked defense last year, and that was with 6 weeks of Quinnen Williams. Like, having a player like this up front to help you get to third downs, and just kind of build off of that as a starting point can go a really long way. But he's maybe not like a definitive number 1 rusher, unless you're talking about like the 2022-2023 version of Quinnen Williams, where his production was a little bit closer, if not all the way there, towards being more of a legitimate number 1 piece. So I'm not necessarily betting on us getting that 2022-2023 version of Quinnen Williams back. That was 3 seasons ago at this point. He turns 29 years old this year. I'm pretty comfortable saying that's likely in the past. I'm not going to say it's impossible. You get a year like that from Quinnen. And I think a realistic way to look at Quinnen Williams is you're damn happy he's here. The Cowboys were in a rough spot after they traded Micah, and you can accept him as your best defensive lineman, but with what he is and has been the last couple years as a rusher, probably going to be left wishing you maybe had that true Batman game wrecker type for pass rush. The run defense speaks for itself. But we started with Quinnen for a reason. And then with Odigizua fully out of the picture here, Kenny Clark is going to have to fill in big time as the true number 2 here. Whereas in the past, you kind of had an undersized athlete type paired with a bigger bodied, more power-oriented Kenny Clark. It was a really fun trio. That one, if I'm a Cowboys fan, that one stings a little bit. But I get it. It's, different scheme. They really want to live in that, 4-man front with 2 true interior D linemen. Was going to be harder to utilize Odigizua, especially because they do ask these guys to often take on double teams and command a lot at the line of scrimmage. And I think Kenny Clark can still do that. He can get a little bit upright. His run defense has kind of ebbed and flowed throughout the years. And that was the same in Green Bay. He's really good at deconstructing blocks and shedding at the point of attack. But just in terms of like consistent instincts, pad level, true core power, like to not get driven back. Like he's just a good run defender, but he does take his negative reps in that sense. He is actually better as a pass rusher than as a run defender. He's got a really good first step. He's great with his hands to land that bull rush. And just his ability to get off blocks as a pretty good athlete, as a big guy. He's just a very functional pass rusher. So like him as a true number 2 is a nice piece. And I would say that is your 1-2, Quinnen and Kenny Clark, with the rest of these guys kind of filling in here. Let's go out to the edge there. So Donovan Ezeraku is going to be the next guy I think Cowboys fans are looking to and hoping for a big year from. A really nice rookie season. I would say was as advertised for me. He was a really high floor prospect. I wasn't stunned that he fell to the second round because he is a player that like he is not crazy fast. He doesn't have crazy power. Like he's not the biggest guy. If you want edge rushers to really ascend the ranks more often than not. There's a baseline of traits that you look for, and Ezeraku was a little bit below that mark. But he's incredibly crafty. He's really quick-footed. His agility is excellent, and he's so savvy with his hands. He's got the swipes and the cross chop, and there's even more room to develop that pass rushing plan and skill set and continue to learn how to dissect, tackles throughout the course of a game. And I think you can expect a little bit of a next step for that reason. But I'm not expecting Donovan Ezeraku to reach that level as like a number 1 or even 1B type of guy. Like, Cowboys fans know what that looks like, right? You've had Micah Parsons, you've had DeMarcus Lawrence. I know that Ezeraku was exciting, and the fact that he produced as a rookie makes you think like, oh, there's so much more to be unlocked. I don't know how realistic that is. I think he was always a very high floor, decent ceiling prospect. And he's on track to fulfill that as a really nice value as a second round pick. I don't think expectations should go too far for Ezeraku, in my opinion. And he's also just like, because of that lack of size, he can get overwhelmed as a run defender at times, but he plays his ass off against the run, and he's savvy to get off blocks. There's more to continue to learn in that sense too. But he's a really nice player, and I think you're really hoping he will be definitively your best edge player this year. It's not an ideal best edge on your team when you start to compare it to all the other teams in the league, but you're definitely not in a horrible spot there, especially if you can take another step. And then you have Rashawn Gary opposite of him, who's consistently regressed 5 years in a row. And the Packers saw that, and that's probably expected here, unless he really just becomes remotivated in a change of scenery. Still a good player, right? Like he has, while he's regressed as a pass rusher, he has actually really used that size over time and learned how to set a hard edge and become a much better run defender. I think that's where he's going to be missed most for the Packers. The pass rush for him has really just fallen off, and even giving him the credit of a 77 rating as a rusher, that's a tough sell for some of his games. I mean, he really looks like he's lost a step. He had that really bad knee injury right at the peak of his powers when he was hoping to emerge as something closer to like a defensive player of the year type of candidate. And he just kind of hit a wall, lost a lot of explosiveness, and he's also a player that you've wanted to see him be able to win with that bull rush more consistently, and especially now that he's lost half a step, if not a full step, like it's just hard for him to do that. So you're left with a guy that's like pretty active with his hands. He's got pretty decent swipes to like disengage. He gets a lot of like late pressures. And while Packers fans love to point to some plays where like he's out of playmaking range and he's like walking towards the quarterback, there was some viral clips of Rashawn Gary that maybe ultimately were his death sentence in terms of like fan perspective or whatever. But I do think in general, his motor is pretty good, and he's going to help clean some stuff up. And if Quinnen and Kenny Clark are flushing quarterbacks out of the pocket, Gary's going to have that edge contained set and can get you some cleanup pressures and sacks as well. He's a useful like fourth piece for a defensive line that is definitely regressing. So he bakes into the wild card equation in terms of like just how much of a fall off are we talking with him. But hopefully you can still get another solid year or two out of him. And those are your core starters, but you definitely have a handful of other pieces that are going to be in the mix here, especially that first-round edge rusher Malachi Lawrence, who I expect to really be the first player rotating in. But there's plenty of snaps to go around for him to get on the field quite a lot. I'll just say it, like I think he was slightly overdrafted. He's still a good prospect. He got a lot of this first-round hype in the weeks leading up to the draft, and I couldn't quite get there with Lawrence. I liked him, and I wasn't that far off of where he got drafted. He was more of a second-round prospect for me. But to the Cowboys' credit, too, though, like I do see how you arrive at wanting to, swing at some upside with Lawrence. Most of the edge rushers that get drafted, like basically outside of the top 20, tend to be more like high floor, lower ceiling, like almost like Donovan Ezeraku types, where it's like he's probably going to be more of a 2, just because of the traits. Lawrence, there's no shortage of traits, right? Like he's fast as hell. He's got the size and length. I do think he's a still a little bit skinny. Like, I think there's room for him to bulk up and help his pad level. Like, I do worry that he's going to hold up against the run right away. I think it's going to take him some time, or at least fast development, to be ready. And also, like, he also played at UCF, and I know UCF's like in the Big 12 now, but he really wasn't going against any quality competition at tackle against him, and UCF used him in that frustrating like college style 3-3-5 defense where he's like playing from a 4-eye. So he also needs to learn like how to consistently line up off the edge and stem moves together and like have that pass rush package at large. But the fact that you're taking an athlete out of that infrastructure and putting him in more of a projectable NFL role, there's really a high upside to get excited about him as maybe more of that number one piece you're looking for, because you do have Ezeraku, you do have Rashawn Gary, but if you're swinging for a little bit more physical upside, I do get it. I get how they arrived at it. I just have some questions if he was overall just a good enough prospect to take where they did. I thought there was other players, but still not a bad pick that could return dividends. I just think if, the draft is a game and you're playing risk, the risk was maybe just a little bit too much for my comfort with the 23rd pick in the draft after you traded down from 20 and gave Mekhi Lemon to the Eagles. Anyway, definitely think the long-term runway is there for him to develop. I just don't really see a high-end impact in year one, and I would love to be wrong about that. In fact, I wouldn't be stunned if Sam Williams is right next to Lawrence in terms of playing time and maybe even gets a little more. Williams is still fascinating. I mean, he's had some really exciting moments here with the Cowboys. Last year, kind of quietly came back from a really bad injury, and he's just been kind of hanging out. Nobody talks about Sam Williams, but they're able to get him back again, and I feel like he's a nice rotational piece that maybe a year removed from the injury could get closer to the version of Sam Williams we saw earlier in his career that like showed some legit like impactful juice off the edge. Not necessarily counting on it, and I don't think the Cowboys are either. You've got James Houston, who's kind of a undersized flamethrower off the edge, who had some fun moments last year. He's a good rotational depth to have. They're actually going to slide Maurice Luafau to edge, position change, flyer. He's a physical guy that can get off blocks. So, if you're looking at like the Zaven Collins trajectory, you take an off-ball linebacker who theoretically knows how to stack, peek, and shed, teach him how to set a hard edge and be kind of this early down piece for your base defense. Like, sure, why not? He wasn't going to give you much at linebacker, so we'll see what they can get from him. Charles Snowden has actually turned into kind of a nice, unique chess piece as an on-the-ball linebacker. Would theoretically fit a Vic Fangio early down defense, just as a Maurice Luafau would. Just kind of that unique early down skill set that can drop into coverage a little bit extra. He's going to be suspended for the first 3 games, and there's a chance that actually helps him make this team as they sort through things. Could hurt his chances of making this team, but was a decent little pickup on the cheap. And then you go to your interior D-line depth, and they signed a couple guys, Otito Agbanya, who I think they're counting on like continued growth. He's had just like he was really bad early for the Chargers, big like brick shithouse of a defensive tackle with a decent first step that they were hoping would develop, and maybe like the most minor of incremental growth throughout the years that he's played a decent amount. They're hoping they can continue to get more and more out of him. They gave him, I think it was 1 year, $2.8 million. So it wasn't nothing, certainly more than I would have given him. But Jonathan Bullard's been a nice rotational early down run defender that they bring in to be like a base 3-4. And we saw in Philadelphia, they ran base 3-4, like a quarter of the time, basically. So that's what Bullard and LT Overton are here to do. Overton, like I actually really like him switching to interior D-line. I think that's really self-aware of him. He's got strong hands and is good at the point of attack, and even had like some decent moments like rushing inside the tackles at Alabama, but just clearly did not have the juice to be an edge rusher at the next level. Love the self-awareness to bulk up and be more of a hybrid end type of guy in a 3-4 system. I like the fit. I really do. It could take him some time, learn how to play at this new weight and a new position, but love having Bullard there next to him to kind of show him the ropes. And someday I think LT Overton can be your starting defensive end in your base 3-4 types of defenses. And then you also have Jay Toya, who this team drafted last year. Yeah, 7th rounder last year. We haven't seen too much from him. But yeah, there's your defensive line. It is a fun unit. Like I said, it's a wild card for me. This could ebb and flow up and down a little bit. It's not a drastic wild card. Like right now, they rank 10th to 12th for overall D-line. I think if Lawrence surprises as a rookie, as Araku takes another step, Kenny Clark, who's getting older, 31 years old, but this is his 11th season. He's got a lot of wear and tear on him. Like, can he sustain? Rashawn Gary's definitely regressing. So how much does he regress here? It's just kind of this whirlwind of where do all these guys land? I've got them ranked 10th to 12th right now. Could they be 7th or 8th this season? I think that's possible. Or does this land more closer to like the 20s? I think that's kind of your range for this defensive line with some decent volatility there to sort through. But let's go to linebacker here. And just like they did with their front four, they definitely hit the reset button on this group too, where Kenneth Murray is gone. Logan Wilson, who they acquired midseason, is gone. He actually retired, having really shown that he can't really move anymore. Jack Sanborn is gone. He goes back to Chicago. Damone Clark didn't really play much last year. He goes to Detroit. So pretty much the entire linebacker room is out, and none of which you're worried about losing. None of these guys played well last year. And then you technically add DeMarvion Overshown, who did come back late last season and started to look like his old self a little bit, but only played 20% of snaps. So anticipating him now, a full year removed from his brutal injury, to be getting a full season from him. They trade for D Winters, a sneaky little acquisition on draft day like that. And then they're doing a lot of moving these guys around positionally. LT Overton's going from edge to interior D-line. You got Maurice Luafau's moving from linebacker to edge. And then their 3rd-round pick, Jayshawn Barham, was an edge player for Michigan and is actually going to do a reverse Micah Parsons, go from edge to linebacker, which is fascinating. But I did say upgraded at linebacker. This was a brutal linebacker unit last year, was a key contributor towards them being the worst defense in the NFL last year per DVOA. And certainly hoping that's going to be an improvement this year as we look at these guys, really focused on a 2 linebacker defense with DeMarvion Overshown and D Winters, I think, starting next to him. For me, pretty clear choices to be the starters here. I'm sure they'll keep their eyes open for like Shamar James, who played a little bit last year, and Jayshawn Barham be in that conversion project, but feel pretty good saying it's going to be Overshown, pending health, and D Winters. And honestly, like both these guys together, Overshown and Winters, are exciting. And this linebacker room also gets the wild card icon for me. Like this could actually be a really legit tandem here, but you need some big steps from these guys. Like Overshown, not only does he have to solidify himself as a consistently good linebacker, which he's been really close to solidifying himself as, but he's got to stay healthy, right? He's missed so much time, multiple like serious ACL injuries. Durability is going to be a constant concern with him. But this dude flies around. He's kind of like a poor man's version of like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. He's an excellent blitzer. He's a nuisance in coverage with like good instincts that, the zone IQ, there's only room to get better there. He's an adequate run defender just because he outruns blocks. He's a good like heavy hitting tackler, triggers quickly. He's undersized, so like he'll get swallowed up in the run occasionally, but he's a really fun player that, he just got to stay healthy, man. So I do think if he stays healthy, and there's really no reason to think he won't other than his track record, he should continue to get better. And then you got D Winters, who's the literal poster boy, I think, for like how I would treat linebacker in the NFL. And I'm really surprised the Niners gave up on him when they did, because I think this is what you do. You draft athletic, instinctive day 3 linebacker prospects that you know are going to struggle early, but put them in a room where they got to fight for playing time, learn from veterans with good coaching staff, develop, and when they get their opportunity, this is the path for linebackers at one of the hardest positions in the NFL to learn to really break through. And D. Winters had to get on the field last year with all those injuries at linebacker, was flying around, wasn't perfect, but made some plays in coverage, had some highlight games and primetime moments, reminded us of that guy at TCU that was like a huge part. You remember TCU went to the national championship? Like D. Winters was a huge part of that team. I thought he was a good value when the Niners drafted him, and they just kind of ship him off to Dallas here because the Niners, ever the optimists, think they're set with Dre Greenlaw, magically going to stay healthy this year for the Niners apparently, and third round pick Nick Martin is going to work for them, right? I think that was a bad idea for the Niners. I think they regret trading D. Winters, and I think D. Winters coming back to Texas in a contract year is a perfect fit here. Like, this is a really good value addition. I really, really like this. Is he perfect? No, like he still has a lot to prove, and that's why the up arrow's on him, but they're in a much better spot with these two guys. And I'm actually excited to see what these two guys can do together. You got a lot of instincts and athleticism. Size and discipline is lacking to be developed there. That's why they come in 26th to 27th for linebacker run defense. But they do come in top half of the league for me for coverage with these guys. Instincts and athleticism out in space. Some of their pass production is pretty good for how much they've played. So they rank 10th to 14th for linebacker coverage. Just by how the math worked, they still came out as my 26th ranked linebacker unit, which kind of surprised me. Is what it is, I guess. But it's a fun duo that is a clear wild card for this defense. As far as depth, though, like not really counting or excited for these guys. Shamar James, good on him for getting on the field on a horrible defense as a 5th round pick. And he hits really hard. He plays his ass off. Like, God bless his soul. But, I mean, he was a really rough watch, both in run defense and coverage. He's undersized and slower, which is just a really bad combination. So he's kind of up against it in terms of like being anything more than a backup and a special teamer, in my opinion. And then Jayshawn Barham is just he is definitely a wild card. I just don't know, right? There's how could you know what his run diagnostics are going to be going through read keys as an off-ball linebacker? How well is he going to actually like do Vic Fangio zone drops? It's a complete unknown. They've drawn some parallels with like Zach Bond, who was more of an edge coming out, made that switch, and they identified him in Philadelphia. That's kind of what they're looking for here. I'm not going to say that's like impossible. I liked Jayshawn Barham, and honestly, like if they do someday switch him back to edge, I think he's got potential there. There was something about him, like for sure, just the motor he played with, the athleticism. I thought he had good like shock in his hands. I definitely, if they're looking at that Zach Bond comparison, they're like, well, as a baseline, Jayshawn Barham, like he will take on blocks with physicality. He's not afraid to play violent. We just got to coach up the linebacker stuff. I see the vision. It's just like, I don't think you're really getting that in year one. That'd be incredible. But we'll see where that ends up going. And then Curtis Robinson, they clearly liked what they saw from that Niners defense, getting the most out of these guys down the stretch, because Curtis Robinson was out there playing next to D. Winters, had a couple of decent games, but he's a career backup type. So there's your linebacker room, definitely in a better spot than last year, but still clearly room to go for them. But let's go to the Cowboys secondary here, the last position unit for the defense. And just as with their D-line and linebacker, they felt the need to shake things up with such a bad defense last year. Really no different in the secondary. They made a bunch of really good moves here, honestly. At the forefront is going to be that first-round pick, Caleb Downs, a certifiably awesome first-round pick, one of the best players in the draft who makes it to them. I think they actually came up one spot to secure him. But he's honestly, like in my mind, factoring in towards more looking at the cornerback room as upgraded as we consider slot cornerback. With the cornerbacks at this point in time, we're probably inching closer and closer to just needing like a nickel designation as a football people. But Caleb Downs, safety coming out, I think he'll still probably play some safety here in base defense. So wherever you want to put him, he goes a long way towards upgrading the secondary overall. But there was more movement beyond just that big first-round pick, of course. They lost a couple of players, one at cornerback, one at safety, a couple of guys in Trayvon Diggs and Donovan Wilson, who have been recognizable names for Cowboys fans, but certainly not any losses there that Cowboys fans are going to sweat. Trayvon Diggs was actually released at the end of last season. Donovan Wilson could strongly consider as addition by subtraction with how bad he was last year. And then some other moves as well. At cornerback, they did sign Kobe Durant, nice kind of floor-raising veteran corner, comes over from the Rams. Siobhan Revel is to be considered an addition to this team. You know, he did get back on the field, played 30% of snaps in his rookie season, and, unfortunately it just wasn't very good. We'll continue to talk about him, but a full season removed from that injury, a player that did fall in the draft because he was coming fresh off of that ACL tear at ECU. So hopefully can get some more from him moving forward. And then they spent a 4th-round pick on the big body Devin Moore out of Florida as well. So a bunch of new names mixed into the cornerback room. And then at safety, not only did they get Caleb Downs into this secondary, but they also made one of the value free agent signings of the offseason, getting Jalen Thompson here. Really excited to talk about him. And then PJ Locke as well reunites with Christian Parker from their Denver days. So again, I said upgraded at both cornerback and safety. And that, by the way, just rounds out like a really nice offseason for this Cowboys defense with all these moving pieces. Yes, the loss of Osa Odigizua stings a little bit, but I still looked at this D-line overall as upgraded, linebacker upgraded, and the secondary upgraded as well. That is good news for Cowboys fans who had to watch this defense last year. But as far as the Cowboys secondary is concerned, they came out ranking 17th to 18th for me for overall secondary. From a coverage perspective, they're in that big middle cluster of like very solid but indistinguishable coverage units that probably won't project a team forward from a coverage perspective, but hopefully won't hold them back either, which 16th to 25th this year, just a lot of middling secondaries. But they do separate from that pack a little bit because they rank favorable for the run defense aspect of things, which is kind of a tiebreaker for me, if you will. So they rank 7th to 15th for DB run support, and again 17th to 18th for overall defensive back grade here. But let's talk about these players. At cornerback, you got Deron Bland. You could argue that for the yellow arrow on Deron Bland, really a tough nut to crack here, because he's one of these DBs that has kind of like Trayvon Diggs before him, like really stood out for the playmaking ability and like ball skills and some of the picks and the big moments. But the down-to-down coverage ability for him has been really inconsistent. And he's also tough because he's clearly going to step outside. And I think his best play has been as a slot. So tough player to rank. I still feel pretty decent saying like I know what he is. And that's a really instinctive physical corner that's probably a little bit overpaid here, but still a decent piece. Definitely a guy that you wish was your number 2 corner. Because I think those players that do get beat in coverage, that take risks, that maybe don't have the best athleticism or technique, that have some games where they're just cooked and you're laughing at them and they're getting, posterized on social media. Yet, if you put the ball in their area or they're playing a lot of zone coverage, like they'll find their way to the ball and change some games with their play. And Bland definitely shows up, like getting off blocks, tackling, has been really good at that from the slot. So like week to week, what you're getting from him in coverage is very inconsistent, but on a macro scale, I feel pretty good saying we roughly know what he is, as long as he's healthy too. Like he's also missed a lot of time. I'm not quite ready to put the injury prone label on him, but it's something to keep an eye on. But that's your number 1. And then you got Kobe Durant, who's kind of in that same category. Durant, like seriously, he's been really inconsistent. His size works against him. He'll give up some contested catches. He's not the freakiest athlete. or rangiest zone corner, but he's got, good off zone IQ. When the ball's in his area, he does have like some really good plays on the ball, some instinctive moments. He's a physical player. He's exactly what they paid him to be, and that's a floor raiser as a CB2 in a Fangio off-zone style system, which is exactly how Kobe Durant fits. When you have all these question marks with your cornerback depth, it's a necessary signing just to raise the floor a little bit. But let's talk about some of that cornerback depth before we get into Caleb Downs, because I think Downs is kind of the perfect bridge through the nickel and up towards the safety conversation. You've got Siobhan Revel, who I think they'll give an opportunity to win this job. Like, there's no doubt Revel has a better upside than Kobe Durant. Revel was a first-round corner before the ACL tear, but it feels like it's been a pretty nasty ACL injury. He fell to the third round, that alone was kind of unexpected because it had been a long time. Like, he got hurt in like week 3 of his final season or something at ECU. So it's been a long time since that injury. You worry, a little bit about like, has he been able to get his full juice back? Because he came back late last season and was not good. I'm willing to give him a pass that he just, rushed back, not quite comfortable. But like, we got to see something, right? Like, obviously the Kobe Durant signing was made because they can't count on Siobhan Revel. I think it will be a position battle and will be something to monitor throughout the preseason here, because if Revel's out there, you're more intrigued that maybe he is a draft steal and becomes a legitimate number 1 corner, in which case Deron Bland could settle in, like I described, as the perfect number 2. But the ball is in Siobhan Revel's court now to earn that opportunity. And it's not like he was a first-round pick, right? If you take a risk on a third-round injury or player coming off an injury in the third round and it doesn't work out, you're not going to give them that extended runway necessarily. You've got Reddy Stewart, who's more of a slot cornerback backup who played valiantly on a horrible Cowboys defense last year and now gets to settle in as like slot cornerback depth that has played. I think that's fair. I'm not expecting much more from Reddy Stewart, who was still inconsistent despite being a fun story last year. You have Devin Moore, was a 4th-round pick, who's fascinating, and I like the fit as a big, physical, high IQ zone corner. I would say he's in the Rasul Douglas, Mike Jackson world of what you're hoping for, where he doesn't really move well in space. He's probably not going to be ever a shutdown corner or anything like that. But Devin Moore's tape was just like kind of nice. Even if he was so big and rigid, it was just like zone coverage. He kind of just got it. So I see what they like in him. Kind of a unique, outlier of a day 3 cornerback prospect. And in a Fangio system, I could see it, but he's got to go out and prove it. Triquez Bridges, made his way over after getting drafted by the Chargers. Hasn't really shown too much. Kalen Carson, looking like a draft miss for me. He was actually a top 10 corner for me that year. He, along with Deonte Banks, are the reason why I have really cranked up how much I value a corner's ability to find the football, to get their head around. Kalen Carson has that same problem where, and maybe not in the NFL, his coverage hasn't been so sticky, but in college, he was right on his guy, but could never really find the ball, and he's a little bit too grabby. So, he came back late last year off of an injury and like flashed before struggling again. It probably nothing there, but he is a big physical, athletic cover corner. So those guys don't grow on trees necessarily. And he's got an opportunity to come in here and compete. But I think realistically, it's probably between Revel and Durant, unless Devin Moore like really just comes in and it's like, dude, this rookie freaking gets it. Let's go with the really smart 6'3" guy. That's going to be a good fit with Devin Moore. But obviously, it's up in the air for that CB2 spot. And then you got Caleb Downs. Kind of feels like a player that it almost feels redundant to spend a lot of time on him because he was one of the more well-documented players in the draft process. And I would imagine 90% of you, if you're 2 hours into a Cowboys deep dive like this, you were probably paying attention to draft season. You probably know a little bit about Caleb Downs, but the SparkNotes version on him is he's not the biggest guy. He's not the fastest guy. but his heart might be the biggest. This guy plays his absolute ass off. He plays above his size as a run defender, and that's why they love sticking him in the nickel, where he played a lot at Ohio State, where he can legitimately fill the run, be this team's Cooper DeJean in that sense. Have, like, if you want to run a screen or a swing pass at him, he's not going to have any of that shit. Like, he runs the alley, he tackles in space. He's a complete captain of the defense type. And he's really good at taking stuff away over the middle of the field, whether it's man coverage, where he's got really quick feet and good enough speed, or zone IQ. He had some of the best intermediate zone IQ that you'll ever see from a college safety. And his floor is just tremendously high, if not the highest out of any player in this entire draft, not named Jeremiah Love, I suppose. But really a good pick. I think especially since it's been announced that he's going to play in the nickel, some version of Brian Branch would be a really good pro comp for Caleb Downs, which is an all-pro level slot corner / safety. And that's the other thing, is if they're in a base 3-4 defense, I would bet that Caleb Downs is probably going to be the safety, with either Hooker or Jalen Thompson coming off the field. So he'll probably play a little bit of both, but primarily as that nickel corner. And then you do have a decent veteran safety duo behind him. Honestly, I'll start with Jalen Thompson. Malik Hooker's been here, and Jalen Thompson got like nothing in free agency, but he's a really good player. It's been kind of hard to tell the difference between Jalen Thompson and Budda Baker the last couple of years in Arizona, to be honest. Like, he really learned how to play ball from Budda, and he plays with that same just like crazy speed to the ball, aggressive but like consistent tackler in space. Really a good like heartbeat for your defense on the back end. Man, like, this reminds me a lot of what I said about when the Panthers signed Trayvon Merrick, where the idea is the same of a guy that's maybe not a remarkable cover player on the back end, but he's going to give you that speed to the ball and the ability to clean stuff up from the backside. But Trayvon Merrick got like almost double what Jalen Thompson got on the open market. Thompson just doesn't have that draft pedigree and played at Arizona and isn't as well known seemingly even around the NFL. Now, it's not like he got nothing. He got a 3-year, $33 million contract. So like, good on him for getting that payday, but really a nice addition for the Cowboys. That was obviously made like before they knew they were going to get Caleb Downs in the draft. So, I've really two of these guys that I think are kind of like the heartbeat of your defense in many ways. Just the energy to the ball. And especially like D Winters and Overshown back healthy, you're going to feel that difference, especially as a Cowboys fan, just like casually watching this defense. The product will be probably still up and down, but it's going to feel like just a faster defense that cares a lot more, thanks to Thompson and Caleb Downs. Coverage stuff for him is just like pretty solid. Like, he's never been a super big difference maker as a coverage player, but he's got range and decent ability in that sense. Malik Hooker's more of a regressing vet. He's holding down that spot, and it probably will be him that comes off the field for base defense. He's had a lot of coverage busts and moments where it looks like he's kind of on the decline there, but he still is, and last year was still their best tackler on the back end. Still has his role at this stage back here on a 1-year, $5 million contract. Then you've got your safety depth. PJ Locke, I've never been a fan of his game in Denver, but they like him, just the energy he brings on the back end. But he's had a lot more bad moments in coverage than good ones, certainly. But he's got a lot of experience in a defense like this. So as depth, you could theoretically do worse, though it's hard to do too much worse than that as you're technically first safety off the bench. But probably you're talking about, if Hooker or Thompson get hurt, it's probably Downs going back to safety, and then it's like Reddy Stewart in the slot, or maybe Bland in the slot and Revel steps in. Like, you've got some moldability in that sense. Like, if you have an injury, you are pliable with versatile skill sets here. And Marquise Bell was more of a fit in like previous regimes, that idea of like that big thumping box safety. Not a ton of examples of that necessarily in a Fangio defense. You might look at like the big nickel safety idea with like a Kyle Hamilton, but kind of feels like at least the Fangio tree wants more coverage to pair with that run defense capability with like a Caleb Downs or Cooper DeJean. That's not really what you're getting with Marquise Bell. He's more of just a big safety. Definitely a good special teamer to have around though, with his speed and tackling ability. But yeah, there's your Cowboys secondary. I think outside of Caleb Downs and like just how good is he as a rookie and some of those intriguing cornerback pieces as depth, it's probably a unit that you kind of know what you're getting. And I think right now it's just like we have raised the floor way more with this Cowboys secondary compared to what they had last year. And I think as we start to kind of tie all this together, you'll live with that. We know what this offense is capable of. As I mentioned, this was quite easily one of the worst defenses in the league last year with a raised floor in the secondary. What we talked about in the front seven, they came out as my 22nd ranked defense. And that's with these being more like floor projections. The Cowboys on paper have risen the floor of this defense really nicely. 22nd in pass defense, 20th in run defense, came out pretty balanced in that sense. There's definitely areas for things to get better than that, especially if the coaching ends up being really good with a rookie coach here. If they can even push into the teens, be the 18th best defense with this offense, like there is a lot of upside with the Cowboys. And like, man, there's a lot of depth in the NFL, man. This is a really good team to be the 19th ranked power ranked team. And I'm sure there's going to be some Cowboys fans that say this is too low, and they very well might shatter that. It's just kind of the nature of the series, right? Like this team does have, while they have a lot to get excited about, they got their fair share of unproven commodities that are going to just pull them down a little bit in the rankings here. But we do still have to talk some special teams for Dallas, which is an exciting conversation. In the case of the Cowboys, they have a sweet special teams. Because of that, they didn't have to make any changes this offseason, really. Running it back with Brandon Aubrey, who's the best kicker in football. Brian Anger, who wasn't as good last year as he's been, but still a really good punter. And Kevontae Turpin, who's one of the best return men in the NFL and does both kicks and punts. Like that just raises the floor tremendously. Now, PFF team grade and DVOA team grade saw some issues with the special teams with like kick coverage and some of that stuff. So they actually came out 6th for overall special teams, despite the fact that they probably do have the best specialists between kicker, punter, and returner. But definitely a very nice projection for the Cowboys special teams once again. So let's pull up my handy dandy Venn diagram with my strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors. A lot going on with this Cowboys team. A long list of strengths to get excited about, which I was just talking about. Like you got the quarterback weaponry combo that so many teams would dream of. You have an ass-kicking offensive line from a run blocking sense and a really heavy-handed D-line for run defense as well. So you're going to set the tone at the line of scrimmage in the run game especially, and special teams is a strength as well. As you look at the weaknesses, pass blocking, as we discussed, is a huge wild card for this team. It shows up in that wild cards category as well. Probably the biggest pivotal factor for this team this year is, I think they'll be able to throw the ball one way or another, but if you're talking about realistically a team where the defense is going to be improved, but maybe not great, you need to be a world-beating offense if you want to go be like a championship contender. It's hard to be a world-beating offense when your pass protection is some of the worst in the league. And there's an avenue for like Tyler Guyton and some of those other younger guys to take more steps forward that it's not one of the worst in the league. You just got to be even like 24th for pass pro, which is manageable. And you should be okay there. The other weakness is linebacker run defense, but linebacker also shows up as a wild card. Just a couple of guys that could actually prove to be, pretty good players for this Cowboys defense, if not even like strengths. Like I really like the upside of Overshown and D Winters. It's a fun pairing that just has a lot to prove. But as far as other wild cards that are going to swing things for this team, running back, like that definitely is a wild card. We all love what we saw from Javonte Williams. But you got to have honest conversations with some of these injury-prone players, and if something happens to him, your run game is going to look a lot different this year than what it looked like last year, even if you have great run blocking. So that's a wild card. The defensive line is a wild card, just with all the kind of ebbs and flows that we talked about. Some guys getting older, regressing. Some guys you're hoping, take steps forward. And then defensive coaching is probably the biggest wild card for that defense. You're feeling pretty confident heading in, but we know a great defensive coordinator can really uplift a defense. And we got to find out if Christian Parker can be one of those guys and carry on the Vic Fangio legacy here. And overall, I really like how this paints that picture of like a lot of big strengths for this team, but there's definitely some pretty big core pivotal factors and wild cards that can help better explain how the Cowboys ended up 19th in a preseason power rankings such as this. But power rankings and the formula that I use for this series being set aside, let's now get into more prediction territory for myself and how I think things actually end for the Dallas Cowboys. So their Vegas over-under is 9.5 wins. They are pushing up against the Eagles as far as division odds. Not quite up there with them, but kind of close behind them, to be honest. They are 22-1 to win the Super Bowl. That gets them inside the top 15. So based on the Vegas odds, the Cowboys did actually come in a little bit lower for me for all the reasons we just detailed. But I definitely see the upside here. And when I think about this team's upside, I had their win ceiling at 11 wins. I think if everything comes together, this can definitely be a team that wins the NFC East, that makes some noise in the NFC, like we've seen some of these Dak Prescott-led Cowboys teams do in the past, kind of get back to that type of peak. The floor for me is pretty good. I have it at 6 wins. I think the worst case scenario would be the defense continues to really struggle. Javonte gets hurt and the run game isn't as good, and you're left with in a lot of shootouts. And if the pass protection can't hold up super well, that's probably the worst version of the Cowboys, which is closer to what we saw from this team last year, and about a 6-win team. But that's still a decent floor for our 19th ranked team here. My final prediction on Dallas was 9 wins, and it really just came down to the schedule that was the difference between me predicting 9 or 10 wins. It's right on that fringe of that over-under. I think it's a good line, but man, they didn't get a whole lot of luck in terms of home road and some of their hardest games. Like they drew at Houston, at Green Bay, at Seahawks, at Rams, and then Baltimore is Brazil, which was supposed to be a home game. Like you start to stack that up, that's probably the difference of a win or so. In terms of trying to predict this team. It's not that they can't overcome it. It's not that I didn't think about making this a 10-win team and kind of staking this as a team that will exceed the 19th power ranking. And even a 9-win prediction probably leaves them more in the 15-16 range. It's just kind of how my formula spit the Cowboys out. I feel good about the individual rankings and ratings that I placed throughout it. This team's just got to take care of business and hit some of those green lights. But let's finish with my team superlative awards here. So for team MVP, which is a non-quarterback award for me, and even like if it wasn't, there's so much being brought to the table from Dak to CeeDee Lamb to George Pickens that they all kind of eat into each other anyway. But regardless, I said Quinnen Williams as the team MVP because I think we've talked about this Cowboys defense, like should be a higher floor defense than what they were last year. I think that's all built around Quinnen Williams being that core piece for the whole defense in the middle of it, right up the gut. Biggest wild card, it's Tyler Guyton. I mean, how could it not be? Like, you got to get more from him than they've gotten, and they're counting on it. They didn't really do anything to put him on the hot seat necessarily. They're going to give him the runway to fail again this year, and you're hoping that he does not fail, that he can succeed and get better. He's got the tools to do it. That's why he was a first-round pick, but the play has not backed that up to this point. Breakout offense, I went with Jaden Blue. I do think there's a decent chance that Javonte Williams has worse health. I hate to put it on him, but like that's been the story of his career. if that happens, I liked what I saw from Jaden Blue. I like the run blocking here. I like what he brings to the table as a receiving back too. Even if Javonte stays healthy, I think with Jaden Blue being healthy this year, he's going to get some opportunities to at least emerge as like a pretty fun piece. So I've kind of come around on Jaden Blue after I was not a fan of that draft pick, and now he's going to go and do nothing now that I am endorsing him. I'm sure. Breakout defense, easy pick for me, D Winners. I'm not going to reiterate everything, but I'm a big believer that that he was a really good acquisition for Dallas. Unsung hero, I went with Jalen Thompson, actually, on the back end, because rightfully so, Caleb Downs is going to get all of the love for what he's going to bring to this secondary. I think Jalen Thompson brings something relatively similar and kind of allows you to like double that impact of just getting that pulse of your defense with the rally and tackle ability, a lot of speed and experience there with Jalen Thompson. Really good contract. No one ever talks about Jalen Thompson. It was the same thing in Arizona, honestly, where Budda Baker is the swaggy, cool, played at Washington, fan favorite. Meanwhile, Jalen Thompson's there, like kind of doing the same thing. And this, I'm not trying to take anything away from Caleb Downs or even Budda Baker when he was in his prime, but it's just like no one ever talks about Jalen Thompson, and he's a really good safety. And then for fantasy MVP, this is where I did go with Dak Prescott. He's going as QB8 right now, and it's pretty hard for me to see a world where he finishes lower than that. It's obviously fun to swing for upside with some of these guys, but especially if you're in a 2 QB league and you need that locked and loaded 2 starters at QB, which if you're not playing 2 quarterback fantasy at this point, I don't know what the hell you're doing. But I have ended up with Dak in my fair share of fantasy leagues and probably will again. So he's my fantasy MVP. I think you could probably double dip with the Jaden Blue analysis there too, because I can't imagine he's getting drafted all that high, especially for PPR type of formats. Blue could certainly have some value there. But there is your Cowboys deep dive. Let me know in the comments down below. If you think this is way too low for the Cowboys, let me have it. I get it. I do. I think this team's going to be extremely pokey and has their fair share of upside as well. So if you hate the ranking, let me have it. But beyond that, if I missed anything, any news and notes on the team that you want to add into the mix in the comments down below, I always appreciate when fans bring that, diehard perspective of little things, whatever it might be. So let me know in the comments down below, as well as who you think comes next with the 18th ranking in this series. I'll see you guys for that within the next few days. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of these deep dives. Please do hit that like button on the way out, and we'll talk soon. Cheers.